Today we're going to look at the 3 competitive army lists showcased by Warhammer Community as part of the advertising for their new Battleforge army builder. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today I thought it would be fun to take a look at the competitive army lists sent in by some top tournament players to showcase the new Battleforge app. I'll put a link down to the full Warhammer Community article down in the video description. I must say though, I think it's done a slightly questionable job of showcasing the app itself. There are a couple of slightly random things in the showcase lists, which I think might be more down to the way that the app has functioned as opposed to the actual people inputting the data. In any case, there were 3 2,000 point lists showcased: Catachan Imperial Guard, Mixed Chaos Space Marines, and an Orc Goff list. So let's have a quick look through, talk about how the lists function and win games, and anything else interesting about them. So first up we have a Catachan Combined Arms Force sent in by Reese Robbins and organised into a battalion and a patrol detachment. There's plenty of the Guard's staple strong units here, with a few interesting quirks and different takes on the standard setup. First of all, we have 3 tank commanders, each armed with the trusty Demolisher Cannon, Plasma Sponsons and a Las Cannon. Interesting to see the use of Plasma Sponsons there, a pretty decent choice against Space Marines, and they certainly work out pretty well with the Catachan rerolls of shots. One of the tank commanders also has Kurov's Aquila as well, which is interesting to see that put on a tank. Usually I tend to prefer putting it on infantry characters who are a bit easier to hide. Advancing down the centre of the board, we have a unit of 8 Bulgren, supported by an Astropath with Psychic Barrier, a Primaris Psyker who knows both Night Shroud and Barrier, and a Ministorum Priest about too for some extra attacks. I do kind of wonder why a Psyker was used instead of another Astropath. Could be a way to save 25 points. I think I would have taken the Astropath myself, but I guess he can flex into Smite if he needs to. There are then plenty of small units for running around screening and scoring objectives. There are 2 Chimeras with heavy flamers, with infantry squads in them with plasma guns and power swords, and likely led by Ironhand Strachan for some orders and extra attacks. 2 Barebones infantry squads, more likely for screening or holding home field objectives, and then 3 Sentinels, 1 armoured and 2 scouts. Those guys just armed with multi-lasers, so they could be good little nuisance units, annoying the enemy with charges, maybe sitting on objectives, or getting into table quarters to score more points. Finally, for some support in the backfield, there's a couple of slightly less standard choices in the Basilisk and a heavy weapons squad with heavy bolters. Typically the vast majority of tournament lists I've seen take Manticores instead of Basilisks. They do tend to outperform them just a bit point for point at the moment, and having just 4 missiles isn't really all that big a deal when the game's only 5 turns long. It's interesting to see no tank ace traces in this list for that matter. I would have been very tempted to buy the one for -1 damage on a tank commander or 4 payload on the Basilisk, and I kind of wonder if that hasn't been done purely because Games Workshop's app doesn't allow it. Otherwise I'm pretty sure a tank ace trait of some sort would have been included. It's pretty much a no-brainer for 1 command point. I think the heavy weapon squad is an interesting choice though. I guess you could use them to lock down a home field objective and provide a decent amount more fire support than a standard infantry squad would have. They are kind of a prime target to take out early though. If the opponent does have a couple of spare autocannon shots, they could shred the team pretty quickly. At just 50 points though, I guess it's not really that big of a deal. Finally, we have Sergeant Harker armed with Payback, who can give an aura of reroll 1s to Catachan fire support, and I am kind of wondering exactly where he slots into this list. I suppose he could buff the tanks turn 1, allowing them to strike and shroud, making them more difficult to deal with in return, or he could just sit back with the heavy weapon teams and Basilisk, though I'm not sure it would be the best use of his reroll 1s, as they're not the most points intensive units. In any case, I think it's a very nice list. Some fearsome anti-tank and anti-space marine fire from those demolishers, potentially a ludicrous amount of attacks out of the Catachan squads in Chimeras, and some incredibly solid objective taking and raw muscle in the big squad of Bulgrins protected by the spells. I'm really not sure this list was the best advert for the Battleforge app though. It did seem to have some weird errors and omissions in it. For some reason, the points totals by the units were coming out slightly different to how much they actually cost, such as the Chimeras and the tank commanders, and it seemed to list each guardsman with a plasma gun as having 2 plasma guns rather than 1. The list definitely seems to be 2,000 points, I don't think there's any errors there, but it's funny that it's quite so much weirdness snuck in even when Games Workshop is highlighting this as a good list that you can build with the app. Next up we have an entire Chaos Space Marine list. It's an unholy alliance between the Word Bearers and the Iron Warriors, and it was created by Justin Curtis. It seems to have done a really decent job of getting the most out of the trickery of both legions, in particular with a lot of stacking buffs being able to affect that Khorne Lord of Skulls, and the unit of Iron Warriors Obliterators. In the Word Bearers HQ section, we have a Dark Apostle with the Benediction of Darkness and Mutating Invocation, meaning that he can give out -1 to hits to one of the cultist units each turn. and as he's an apostle of the Dark Council, he'll be able to know another litany as well on top of that, which he could either use to try and buff their shooting with warp sight play, or maybe give them even more protection with illusory supplication. You could have some very hardy cultist blobs that would be a nightmare to shift off objectives. Whatever the case, they'll be going off very efficiently, as that Epistle of Lorgar allows them to re-roll the dice to see whether litanies work. Finally, Demonic Whispers is a very solid warlord trait, giving him D3 command points at the start of the battle, and also a random re-roll that he can use as he sees fit. There are then 2 sorcerers who can be very reliable in Wordbearer's armies, as they do have a stratagem to auto-pass a psychic test when they fail one. There's a Zinch one with Weaver of Fates, giving +1 invul save, which would be helpful virtually wherever you put it, and the ever-useful Warp Time, which could get you a charge from right across the board with the Lord of Skulls or the Lord Discordant. There's then a Slanesh one, which I suspect is going to be used a bit more aggressively. They've got Death Hex to get rid of some enemy invul saves, and Delightful Agonies for the 5+ Feel No Bane on the Obliterator unit. To round off the battalion, there are 3 units of cultists, 2 big blobs of 30 and 28, really good recipients of the buffs from the Dark Apostle and great for claiming objectives, and if they do get whittled down but not completely destroyed, you could think about using Tide of Traitors on them for 2 CP. So it seems that the Word Bearers are providing the buffs and objective scoring, and the Iron Warriors are providing the actual damage of the list. The Iron Warriors are led by a Lord Discordant and Master of Possession, which he describes in the article as forming a firebase with the Lord of Skulls turn 1, which will be very shooty indeed. It'll have both +1 to hit from the Lord Discordant, and the Master of Possession should be able to get all the units to have +1 to their invul saves, and also reroll 1s to hit and wound by using Infernal Power. A very nasty combo, should be shredding at least a unit per turn with that Gatling cannon. There's then a Defiler with a Combi Melter, Scourge and Twin Las Cannon to add to the firebase, a unit of 10 cultists which could be used just to score some more objectives or screen, and the big bomb of 3 Obliterators to drop down next to the Sorcerer with Delightful Agonies to get some protection, and then put out a silly amount of firepower with Endless Cacophony. Last but not least, we have the Lord of War detachment with a Khorne Lord of Skulls with an Icor cannon. This thing's going to be a real pain to shift with all the defensive buffs that it can get, and if it is looking fairly damaged and about to go down, it could potentially charge forward with the very silly number of attacks it gets in late game to be a bit more of a melee threat and take out something big. Overall, it looks like a really nicely constructed and quite a frustrating list to play against. Pretty much every element is abnormally tough due to all the buffs that are stacked on them, and it seems quite likely that you'd have to expend abnormal amounts of firepower to maybe do very little damage to these units with great invul saves, and other tricks like -1 to hit or feel no pain saves. Last but by no means least, here we have Matt Root's Goff Orks, and it seems very similar indeed to one that we've already talked about on the channel, run by a certain Stephen Mitchell who won a tournament with Goffs. Similar to that one, there's Gazgul, a Weird Boy, a Big Mech and a Pain Boy, leading 3 very big units of Orc Boys into battle. The Orc Boys have all been upgraded to be Scar Boys, so we're just going to be putting out a ludicrous amount of Strength 5 attacks, and between the 5+ invul save from the Big Mech and the 6+ feel no pain from the Pain Boy, they're going to be quite annoying to shift. They should do a very solid job of mashing enemy infantry on the front line, and could be a very good target for Endless Green Tide if they do get whittled down in numbers. I think it's quite interesting that Big Mech in Mega Armor is sort of both functioning as the role of a war boss and a Big Mech. He's been given the Warlord trait Follow Me Lads, and that gives him the War and Breaking Heads abilities that the war boss has, and he also has the Cleverest Boss, making him hit on 2s in close combat and giving him an extra wound and attack. A pretty excellent Orc buffing character build there. He can basically do 2 jobs all at once. There's some nice options for fast mobile objective scoring, with 2 single Deathcopters flying around and 2 squads of deep striking commandos who can pop up when the enemy least expects them. To hold down the home field and maybe sit on home objectives, we have 3 single Smasher Guns, which also could potentially be used to give one of the boys' mobs a 5+ armor save by using the Loot It stratagem if they do go down. Finally, we have some really big hitting threats in 2 units of 5 Meganobs with dual kill source. They'll absolutely murderize anything that they get their hands on, though I do wonder exactly how they'd be played in the list. I feel like they might struggle to get in combat with anything particularly meaningful, and are one of the few armoured targets in the list, so are likely to attract quite a lot of the anti-tank and anti-heavy firepower. I suppose they could aim to make some good use of terrain to stay alive, and just put an absolutely terrifying threat behind the first wave of orcs that the opponent really doesn't want to go anywhere near. I suppose they could potentially be thrown in the teleporter or jumped around by the Weird Boy if it made sense to. In any case, as with the other Goff lists that we talked about, I do really like the theme and feel of this one. It feels exactly as Orcs should be, a massive war boss leading a green tide of Orcs into battle, supported by a few gun contraptions, and some random surprise elements in the Deathcopters and Commandos, even if they are mainly there to do mission objectives. Certainly looks a good fun list to use and a real challenge to play against. So let me know what you think of the 3 lists. It's always cool to see some of the better tournament minds be inventive about different ways to build armies. All 3 of them really demonstrate some creativity, and I think really highlight some nice creative elements that these players have brought in themselves, rather than just going for the absolute cookie-cutter meta build. As I said at the start of the video, if you want to check them out in the actual article, the link will be down in the video description. In any case, if you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly be keeping the 40k Tactics videos coming. And if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. If you have been enjoying regularly, any support keeping the videos coming is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a few extra bonuses, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaway, which happens once a month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.